So I think I've said before that one of the shows that I like to get the opportunity to watch is Krystal Rising with I think Sanger is his name. It's a good show. It's funny watching Krystal starting from MSNBC and somewhat corralled because you're within the context of a corporate structure, and get on YouTube with Rising, and you get to see her personality develop and to some degree flower. And I don't mean that I just mean this in a way where, people grow in their political ideology. And with Sanders in 2016 and 2020, it created a certain degree of space on the left. And there have been certain people who would fill that space. And she was one of those people that has done an amazing job in filling that space in her growth politically. So she has pissed people off because of that. Now, the policy that I went with in 2016 was basically supporting a party that doesn't necessarily back your particular policies is the way for you to continue to get marginalized. Now, my point of view hardened on that in 2020, and Ball has made the same point. Now, the funny part with Ball making this point is she's closer to the Democratic Party than I am. I have no connection to the party at all. Whereas she, at the very least, is to some degree a creature of the party, even though she's considered a lefty in that context. And so her making that point of, look, Joe Biden is going to have to come get my vote. I'm not promising my vote to anybody. Oh, that created some consternation. That pissed some people off. So Krystal has once again pissed a lot of people off. So what did she do this time? Krystal acknowledged something that was just so happened to be true. And in acknowledging a thing that was true, libs didn't particularly like it, and like a bunch of howler monkeys, descended upon her. Now, it is really stupid. And yet, here we are. Where all of these comments, media sign, he puts his 2 cents in that doesn't necessarily matter at all. And you have other groups that were going after her for, again, saying something that just so happened to be true. It's literally a war with reality itself. So let's go into the story. I'm not going to keep it long. But solidarity. Like, share, and of course, subscribe. Let's flip. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, subscribe. You can always support PayPal, Patreon. I don't understand people who don't understand nuance, who can get a thing that's true, somewhat of a factoid, and not be able to parse the information and come away with an assessment of, hey, multiple things can be true at the exact same time. Instead, they attack the person who acknowledges that particular true thing because that person doesn't necessarily look at the world in the exact absolutist way to which they deem reality. When Bernie Sanders was on the debate stage and they asked him about Cuba, he said this.
Everything is bad with the way Fidel Castro ruled in Cuba. Now, Democratic members of Congress who represent Cuban Americans in Florida, obviously you got to win there. They're attacking your comment as absolutely unacceptable, singing the praises of a murderous tyrant. Response.
The response was when Fidel Castro first came to power, which was when? 59? Does that sound right?
59-60.
Okay. You know what he did? He initiated a major literacy program. There was a lot of folks in Cuba at that point who were illiterate. And he formed the Literacy Brigade. You may read that. He went out and they helped people learn to read and write. You know what? I think teaching people to read and write is a good thing. I have been extremely consistent and critical of all authoritarian regimes all over the world, including Cuba, including Nicaragua, including Saudi Arabia, including China, including Russia. I happen to believe in democracy, not authoritarianism. But, you can't say China is another example, all right? China is an authoritarian country, becoming more and more authoritarian. But can anyone deny, the facts are clear, that they have taken more people out of extreme poverty than any country in history. Do I get criticized because I say that? That's the truth. So that is the...
Now, when Sanders said this, I thought, well, yeah, I don't understand the controversy. Now, fact of the matter is, you can say Cuba was an authoritarian country, but you can also say they invested a lot of money into education and into doctors. Now, in saying that, it doesn't necessarily detract from the fact that it was an authoritarian country. Both things are true at once. You can lean on one and say, well, the authoritarian, it doesn't maybe matter that much more to me. By the same token, you still have to acknowledge that the other thing is true just from being an honest arbiter. There was no controversy here in real terms. The controversy here was made by people who, for the most part, just couldn't acknowledge the thing that was true. Didn't necessarily want to deal with the nuance and wanted to take an absolutist perspective of, you can't say anything nice about this particular country. Now, we don't say that about countries that we're okay with. So Saudi Arabia can be chopping heads off and putting people on heads on spikes. That's okay. We're not going to say anything bad about Saudi Arabia in that sense. We don't say anything bad about our allies when we were putting in these dictators, these murderous dictators. No issue about that at all. When the CIA was bombing military generals in Guatemala in order to topple that particular government, Chile, in order to topple that particular government, well, no issue. When we're putting in Pinochet, when we're knocking over the government of Iran, no issue. I'm always amazed at the level of murderous actions that we can take when no one has an issue with, no one gets silenced or put to the side, no one gets shunned. Henry Kissinger is still a person who's perfectly okay in the Democratic circles. George Bush gets rehabilitated after getting 1 million people killed. It's amazing how selective this is in regards to the phony outrage as compared to the actual outrages of people who have blood on their hands. Barack Obama spends billions to topple the government of Syria. Now, whatever you want to think of Assad matters less to me. Should we have spent billions of dollars to get 500,000 people killed by pushing forward a civil war? And it's not even a civil war because we were basically backing jihadists in order to go to that country to try to take down the government. Obama is still fair game. Everybody loves Obama. He gave Joe Biden an endorsement and Joe Biden went up 9 points. Nobody has an issue. But Sanders, making a point that just so happens to be flat fact true, created consternation. It's phony outrage. And even if the people are outraged by it, honestly, that's even sadder. That's even sadder. So, if my opinion of that was, that's BS because, it's a true statement, and the true statement is defense to people who are saying, hey, I don't particularly like the fact that you just made that true statement. Well, that's a defense to that nonsense. Krystal ends up in a similar situation. Krystal says something that just so happens to be true. She qualifies the statement in order to balance what she's saying so people don't necessarily get the wrong perspective of how she perceives this particular person. By the same token, people who looked at it said, hey, I don't like the fact that you said anything nice about the person, even if what you just said just so happens to be true. This is what a group of people decided was of utmost importance that they needed to comment on. They tried to silence her in regards to what she was saying. And again, what she is saying just so happens to be true. Get over yourselves.
Is not the same as Tucker Carlson's. Let's be clear about that. And I think there are legitimate reasons to criticize his approach in terms of a sort of nativist, xenophobe, all of that. But I also think you have to give him credit. Is there anyone on MSNBC who's critical of Democrats in the way that he's willing to be critical of this president?
Zero. No.
I mean, you have to give him credit for that, for being willing to dissent, which has real consequences, as we know, on a mainstream network, on a very highly rated show, one that the president watches and listens to. So it's very high stakes in that way. And I think that for all the problems with Fox News, which there are many, and it is basically most hours like Republican cheerleading in the way that MSNBC is Democratic Party cheerleading. But I don't think there's any voice on MSNBC at this point that is nearly as independent-minded as he is.
He's independent-minded within the context of that network, where most of those people, for the most part, are just pro-Trump. That's her point. And I don't know how you could argue with that point. I think that point is somewhat true. Carlson does take positions that buck the trend in regards to the Republican Party. Now, if you want to say he's trying to do that just for political effect, okay, maybe, but let's at the very least admit that those were things that he has done on his show. Not a big fan of Tucker Carlson, to be fair, and it doesn't necessarily sound like she's a big fan of him either, considering she literally starts it off native as xenophobe. They attack her saying, you shouldn't have given Tucker Carlson any credit at all. Like, across the board. Even if the issue came up, you should have just said, Mom. So when, Sanger said something to you about it, you should have just sat there. 5 minutes. Just sit there. It's ludicrous. You can have any conversation you want within the context of you and your team member. And if your team member asks you something about it, it is perfectly fair game. Not just fair game. It is almost required, if you're going to run a show with a certain degree of authenticity, for you to give an honest response. The howler monkeys that are out there attacking Krystal for this, again, this says more about them than this answer says about her, considering this answer is just, again, true. One person, Mehdi Hassan, comes out, pro tip, you don't have to give credit. You don't have to give credit to white nationalists for anything. You really don't. I suppose you don't, but if you're on a talk show and the conversation comes up, sitting there not saying anything would look utterly ridiculous. Lying seems even worse. An honest perspective is one of those things that's prized. He continues. And to be clear, I say that as someone who shared a lot with Krystal. Fair enough. I just think that lefties shouldn't buy into the Tucker ain't so bad and sometimes seemingly good things argument. Mussolini and trains. I know, matey, but that's kind of the point, right? If Mussolini was actually really good at keeping the trains going, then it is an honest answer to say, yeah, there was a dictatorship, but those trains kept ticking along. Now, you may say the trains don't necessarily matter in the context of it being a dictatorship, and I would agree with you, but let's at the very least admit that the trains kept ticking along. I hope you understand what I'm saying. You can say something that's true, that's qualified, where people can understand there's a certain amount of nuance in what you are saying. Here's another thing. Mehdi Hassan, same guy who had issues with Tucker Carlson and Krystal. It pains me to say this, but we live in a weird world where it took a white nationalist TV star, Tucker Carlson, to persuade white nationalist former TV star Donald Trump to take a coronavirus more seriously, and also, by the way, not to go to war with Iran. That sounds almost complimentary. How weird it is that right here he's saying, you don't have to give white nationalists credit for anything. You really don't. And yet, he's given this white nationalist credit here. How strange that is. How strange. When he does it, it's perfectly okay. When somebody else does it, tisk, tisk. Here's another one. Krystal, when someone says white supremacy is a hoax, say immigrants make our country poorer and dirtier, and program has been called Daily Stormer, a show by neo-Nazis, you really don't have to give them credit for anything. But again, it's the same thing, right? If Cuba actually did have good schools, and you're having a conversation about Cuba, then there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, they had good doctors and good schools, but yeah, it was a dictatorship. The same thing is true with this. You can make the case that Tucker Carlson is a white nationalist, but you can also make the case that he's a white nationalist that every so often gets something right. And yeah, has a certain degree of influence in regards to Trump watching the network. Both of those things just so happens to be true. I don't understand your issue here. I just don't. And yeah, this hypocrite right here, this guy, that guy's a hypocrite. Like, share, subscribe. think so.